Hello, my name is Chris Daniel. I work for the Leading Edge Forum as a researcher and advisor, and my primary job is to help our customers to overcome whatever obstacles they are facing in their business. Usually this is analysis paralysis, but there also may be fear of uncertainty, unknown future, or disruptions that are coming from within and from outside of their organizations. I have run a number of workshops, and today I would like to share with you a couple of observations. Those observations will be centered around the idea of winning support for whatever you want to do. I find this important because my secret, the secret of my job, is that people in the room are the experts. I know just the framework, I know the procedure, how to get the ideas from them, but they are the field experts and they are the only persons that can solve their problems. Perhaps I am acting here against my best interest, but what I've also observed is that in many corporations and organizations, there is strict division between business folks and IT people. If we put it on a diagram, we have business people who want or need to deliver value, and we have IT people who need to deliver working applications. Since business people are paid a lot and IT folks are paid a lot, actually sometimes IT people are paid more than business people, there has been massive pressure on the IT people to become more and more efficient. While we can see some improvements in this space happening in the IT field, like low code, serverless, etc., etc., the reality is that the low-hanging fruit to improving the IT effectiveness is to improve the effectiveness of the entire business. Yeah, you are reading it right. I've seen a number of times a situation where the IT department assumes responsibility for the entire organization and starts developing, running, and supervising strategy for all employees. It's never intended goal, but if you want to be efficient, you need to do right things. And if you want to do right things, you have to make sure other people will not interfere with whatever you are doing. This brings me to why I'm doing this talk. I want you to be able to properly build support for your ideas, present them to the management and get their buy-in. But there is a trick. There is always a trick. The trick is that if you have an idea which requires winning support, it means that it is outside of your primary domain. And if it is outside of your primary domain, it means that, first of all, it's in somebody else's domain. Second of all, somebody else will have to deal with consequences. And third, it may not be the best idea because you may not know everything. It's outside of your domain. So in order to win support for your idea, which is outside of your comfort zone, you need to do three things. First of all, de-risk it. Make sure that whatever happens, nobody will be seriously harmed. Second of all, deal with people's hidden agendas. We all want to be happy. We all want to develop our careers. We all want to have great CVs. So the chances are that the person who's responsible for a given field, if you show up and you tell that person that something should be done differently, the person will consider it to be a personal attack. And if you have de-risked the idea, and if you know how to shift the focus from the person and personal attack to the improvement, then there is the question whether it's worth it. And over the rest of the presentation, we will look exactly how we can do those things. The risking is perhaps the easiest task if you switch your mindset. Here in the Western world, we tend to think about the future ideal end state, and we try to close the gap between here and there. Most of the time, it doesn't work. To change that, we need to stop thinking about the ideal end goal. There is no such thing. There is only the direction, the big idea, the big vision that you have, and your next step. What you need to do is to make sure that you can change your decision after you take your next step, and that you will be able, or somebody else will be able, to deal with all the consequences. Jeff Bezos differentiates between type 1 and type 2 decisions. Type 2 are decisions which are very easy to reverse. If you don't like what you see, you just abandon the project and move back. Type 1 are decisions which are irreversible, and therefore a lot of preparation must be done before they are committed. But what they both have in common is that if you take small steps, you remove uncertainty as you go, either within the project or before the project is commenced. Dealing with personal agendas is a little bit more difficult because they are hidden most of the time. People don't go and announce everywhere that they care about their CVs, or that they want to have a good reputation, or that they don't want to fail their bosses. This is taboo. We don't discuss that. So how do we achieve certain orientation and shared understanding? We need north. If you think about a map and how it works, if I told you to move 2 steps left, each of you would have moved in a different direction, because your left is relative to your existing position, just like any business idea is relative to where you are placed in your organization. But there is a north in business, and this north are your customers. If you can tell that a particular project will deliver more value for customers, that's definitely better than not being able to tell that. And while it sounds like a truism, like a tautology, the whole point is that discussion whether a certain approach will or will not deliver more value to end users changes the focus from the person who's telling the story and the person who's justifying lack of action to whether the change will actually help or not the customer. More, if you argue, you can always design a test and experiment which will help you answer what is right in a given situation. what I found hilarious is that if you are a small organization, probably everyone knows who is the customer. But the larger you grow, the bigger is the gap between people who face customers and people who create IT systems for those customers. Sometimes the first activity that needs to be done in the corporation is to actually gather information about who are the customers and why are they using company's services. Before I talk about the last point, which is about having a good idea, I need to introduce you to the concept of evolution. I'm sure you know what's evolution in the Darwinian sense, but we are talking here about business. And the one-line summary of the evolution is that everything is boring over time. Think of any invention. Light, it was probably shocking to see the first light bulb 100 years ago, but it's no longer shocking unless it doesn't work. The first plane, it must have been a shock. The first gun, etc., etc. I hope you get the point. In the evolution, we have 4 phases. The first one is genesis, which is something highly uncertain, an experiment without the market, but with a potential value for the future. It's like a Persian battery, which generated electricity a couple of thousand years ago, but it had no real usage. Because people want to make things better, they look at that kind of experiments and try to put it into the work. So it's custom built. You are looking for a use case, but you can't get the solution from the market because it doesn't exist there. You have to build it by yourself or have it built for you. Because there is no prior knowledge. You have to experiment, and the risk of failure is extremely high. But if the market niche is big enough, spending some money may be justified. Then there is product. If people see that custom-built solutions are working for a few selected players in the market, they try to package it as product. So you go to the shop, or to the service shop, and they deliver it to you. Note that Genesis and custom build have no prior knowledge, and there's a lot of uncertainty whether a thing will work. If you have a product, you know what to expect. If you buy a car, you know it will be able to drive. And finally, there is commodity, sometimes with the utility network. And it's the point of evolution where the market is very established, it's mature. The volume goes up, margins goes down. It's very predictable. Brands don't matter. So it's like electricity. It's a boring cost of doing business. You notice it only when it fails. And now the point is that if you have any kind of business activity or a product or a service that you deliver to your users, it fits into one of those categories. Let's look at the example. Imagine that your service is to deliver a cup of tea. You have customers, your North Star. You want to deliver them a cup of tea. So you need cup, tea, hot water. To make a hot water, you need water and kettle needs to be powered because you are buying it. So if you add the evolution axis, you get something. What is a worldly map? And now, the most critical point. Components in one category, like for example in the product space, have very similar characteristics. If you have one kettle and you try to replace with a kettle from a different provider, it will not vary much. It may have different features, but your customers, Northstar again, will probably not notice the difference. And if there is any difference, you can assume that after you switch to a new provider, the old one will implement the same feature just to stay on par. Products compete on features, so there is very little incentive to replace one with another one. Similarly, if you look at the commodity space, if you came with an idea how to make hot water 5% cheaper, it wouldn't be a biggie, mostly because in the commodity market, when there is mass volume, very low margins, we already have frameworks which deal with changes and improvements, such as Six Sigma. I know that Agile people don't like Six Sigma, but this is the place where Six Sigma is actually useful. We want to experiment with new approaches in a very controlled way. You as a person don't have to invest. You don't have to convince your bosses to try the new solution. The 5% improvement is actually interesting enough, and they have a framework to process it. So that was about the major parts in the product and commodity space. But Genesis and custom build spaces, each time when you want to introduce those components, you cannot promise anyone results, can you? No, you can't. They are uncertain by nature. I want to re-emphasize the value of the value chain. If you show it to someone, you are demonstrating that you understand how your organization works. I have seen people changing opinions about authors of the map in a second, because it shows everything what's going on within the organization. By referring to customers, you are keeping personal agendas in check. Every action that you propose can be always and should be always analyzed in the light of the value delivered for the customers. You are demonstrating respect for others people's role. They may be responsible for components you are not entering their territory. You demonstrate respect for company financials because you've learned how to execute small steps. And with that map, what you can do, you can list all the possible things that can be done. It's like picking up a more mature version of what you are doing internally in your organization. Note that innovations that happen within certain category have very little impact on the customer because they don't change characteristics, and it's very difficult to justify any investment in this space besides continuous improvement. But if you dramatically change the characteristics, like between a product which requires upfront investment and a commodity which is paid as you use, your organization becomes more efficient, but you have to learn how to use that efficiency. Think about building your internal data centers and using clouds. You may introduce new components, such as try to address different user needs or use some experimental approaches. You may try to change the characteristics of the components that you own. Like, for example, make commodity components even more efficient. that will work on and will have Six Sigma and proper change management process in line. But the real games are components for which you can change characteristics, like, for example, move them from product to commodity space. Note that the market is out there. People know how to use the thing. But if you will provide it to the market or to your organization internally, much cheaper, you put yourself in a very good position. Similarly, if you know how to make something that is custom built right now to a product space, the market opportunity is huge. So you have a number of opportunities, and now for every of those, you should aim to create a small experiment which will prove or disprove what is possible. The challenge is critical. So what you've done, you've built a shared understanding. You've aligned everyone to think about customers. And right now you can look at each of your ideas and evaluate what's the impact. Because it's a graphical form, it focuses rather on what will be the impact of a change than who's proposing it. And if you manage to find small actions that cost a little, but remove the risk, nobody should prevent you from executing them. By the way, do you know what is the value chain of your organization? If not, please try to draw one. Happy to stay in touch. So if you have any questions, drop me a line.